Today, we're stepping into one of the most heartbreaking and rarely spoken struggles parents face: estrangement from their adult children. Why are more adult children walking away from their parents, sometimes without warning or explanation? Is this a growing trend, or are we just talking about it more? We're unpacking the emotional toll, the root causes like trauma, value clashes, and mental health struggles, and how today's cultural shifts and digital influences are shaping this silent epidemic. If you've been left behind, confused, or grieving a broken bond with your child that you still love with your whole heart, this episode offers insight, clarity, and a glimmer of hope. Don't miss it. Welcome to Warfare Parenting, faith-driven strategies for struggling parents of teens and adult children. I'm your host, Laine Lawson Craft. You're in the right place if you're battling with prodigal children, facing family crises, or seeking spiritual guidance in parenting. Today, we'll equip you with powerful biblical strategies to reclaim your child's destiny and restore hope in your family. Let's step into this faith-filled journey of hope and healing together. Well, I'm so excited. We have Kathy Cunningham, a Christian coach, 30 years plus in ministry and private practice. She's a mom and grandmom. Kathy, thank you so much for coming in for this series. We're going to cover a lot for parents of adult children, but today we're going to understand the phenomenon of estrangement. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you, Laine. I am so excited to be here. And this is such a privilege. And this is a topic that is not talked about enough. In fact, the whole dynamic between the parent and the adult child, there's so many layers of that, but this is a big one. And we'll be talking more about some things I'm doing in this area, but I'm seeing more and more the impact of this in our society today.
Yes, yes. Well, let's get right into what are some of the most common reasons adult children choose to become estranged from their parents, and how have these reasons changed over the
Mhm.
recent years?
Yeah, there's been a very small amount of this. It's been around, forever, really. And some of those reasons usually come, they don't feel emotionally safe. There's value conflicts, past hurts that have not been resolved from childhood. Obviously, if you've had a really difficult childhood, that can come into play, especially if it's not been changed or acknowledged. But the phenomena is that now it's not necessarily these big traumas, it's become everyday life situations that are now the reason that they're citing, things like I felt like I was being neglected. But that's from the terminology of today's society, or using terms like gaslighted, or I have a narcissistic parent. Again, these are terms that are very new and being used in a different way than ever before. And I want to make sure I make something clear, Laine. There are definitely instances where this is necessary, but I do not believe that they are to the extent that is happening today. I believe there's so many factors that we're going to be talking about that's bringing this into such a higher level and really destroying the family.
Well, that leads me right into our next question because I was going to ask you, you've been doing this 30 plus years on many levels. Are you seeing that it is on the rise? Or are we just more aware of it? And then what supports whatever you say about that?
Yeah. Well, actually, the answer to that is not easy because it's really both. So we are more aware because of social media. We're more aware of everything, right? Much more than we probably need to be. So everything's out there. But on the other hand, studies have been done. In fact, there's one through Cornell University that states that it is on the rise. And in fact, their study has shown that 1 in 4 adults are estranged from a family member, not necessarily just a parent. So this cutting off of people in family is much bigger than it ever has been. And it's usually going to be saying because they feel unsafe, they feel it's just not the best thing for their life.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I want to kind of get into the emotional impact on
Hmm.
both the parent and the adult child. What are the typical emotions that are felt from the child and the parent when this happens?
Well, I'm sure you can, imagine being a mom. If that ever was something in your life, I mean, for a parent, it's just so much shame, heartache. Unfortunately, for some parents, I think what it does, it causes them to actually get angry and more defensive and withdraw. And that's really kind of what the message is going to be here is how can we as a parent not have a reaction that's going to actually make the situation worse. But we can certainly understand it. It's a very, very hurtful thing. And there's so much grief that comes along with it. I mean, this is a huge loss for a parent. This is our child that we raised, took many, many years of our life that we loved. And then we have this circumstance that we never imagined. In fact, I hear those words often from parents. This was not what I imagined. This was never what I thought would happen. Now, the interesting thing is for the adult child, sometimes, if they feel justified in the estrangement at first, they feel relief because they made this big decision. They don't have to deal with whatever they thought they were dealing with. But pretty much across the board, over time, they begin to feel that grief. They begin to feel that loss. Statistically, it shows it does not make them happier. There's a inherent part of us, God-given part of us that we crave connection with our parents, with our mom and our dad. And when that is taken away, and especially when it is something that doesn't have to be that way, there's a lot of grief and hurt that goes with that, even when that's your choice.
Yes. Well, that kind of, is there a mental health issue like trauma or past family conflict that play in this decision to sever the ties with the parent?
That can definitely come into play. And often that is the original, maybe driving force. Maybe they've gotten into therapy and they've started really delving into family history and how things have affected them. Here's the key, though, that I think that we're missing as parents. We live in a different world because I hear parents say this all the time. Well, I that happened to me when I was a kid, and it didn't, I never disrespected or needed to cut myself off from my parent. We live in a different world. So we got to get rid of that thought process. It doesn't matter. Yeah, you're right. But that's not where we are now. And that's not what our adult children are hearing and absorbing through these different means. And so, as a parent, what happens, a adult child discovers these things, comes to the parent to say, I was really hurt by what happened in childhood. And the parent not knowing how to react gets what we all do. We get defensive, we withdraw, we try to explain ourselves, and it makes things worse. So, my mission right now is to help parents be able to have the emotional resilience and the emotional maturity to do that differently so that they can help in the repair process. And honestly, Laine, I had a little bit of this situation with my kids coming at some point and saying that there were some hurts in their childhood because I think that happens in all families, honestly. We're not perfect, right? And
Right.
I did
No
not
perfect
react.
family.
Yeah, no. And I did not react well originally. Originally, I did all the things that I was defensive, I overexplained, I was upset. And did it help the situation? Absolutely not. Now, I was very fortunate my kids were not the type or in the place that they felt they needed to cut me off. But what it created was strain. It created a disconnect that just wasn't what I would have wanted for my relationship with them. And since then, I've done that differently. And we can talk about that later.
Yes. Well, you touched on this, and it's a very important question. I said, how have changing societal norms and the influence of social media affected the prevalence and perception of family estrangement? We talked about this. One of the things why we wanted to really touch on this today
Hmm.
was because now we've got even Facebook groups that
Yes.
are
Yeah.
supporting this estrangement from
Yeah.
parenting. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, I think that is all coming into the mix. Like I said, it's a different world. And there's so much of this now on social media. There's so many therapists out there that are, this is what they are promoting, and I'm not saying all therapy is bad because it's not. But I think you need to vet your therapist well. And of course, you don't have any control over who your adult children go to see. But the social media piece, and I think the place that therapy is going is adding to this. Now, I want to say there's nothing wrong with going back and looking at your childhood. We all need to do that. But we need to do it. I do that with my clients. We need to do that from a view of I'm not blaming people. I'm doing this to understand, to heal, and hopefully forgive so we can have better relationships. And that should be the norm. There's always going to be exceptions, but we're talking about what the norm should be here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you see, when we talk about estrangement, do you see that there's a notable difference in the rates, whether it's culture, races, or family structures? Do you see a greater estrangement in any of those?
I think it's becoming more and more across the board, is what I'm seeing. But I do think there are some cultural places where people are more connected to family, and it might be less common in those situations. But I think that's starting to break down a little bit also. I think this is affecting everyone because think about how social media and just all the messaging that's
Yes,
coming into our mind is affecting us, and especially with a generation that's all they've heard. They don't
that's all
have
they know. Yes,
exactly.
yes.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, I wanted to kind of get into some prevention and reconciliation points.
Yeah.
If you're estranged, if you're a parent in an estrangement, what steps can you first, foremost, let's talk about preventing it, or
Hmm.
how can we repair a damaged relationship with our adult child?
Right. And that's kind of what I led to a little while ago is that if and when your adult child comes to you with a concern of something that happened, a hurt, a pain from their past, and often it's going to be very different than what you remembered. And I think that's really the hard thing. They come and they present things to us that happened in childhood, and their perception and your perception is completely different. So at first you're kind of blown away, like, what? And you try to over explain it, you try to make excuses. What a parent needs to do, and I know this is hard, I've had to do this. You just listen, you empathize, say, wow, that I did not know that. And I am so sorry that that happened and that's how that felt to you. You have to get into their world and understand that. And that's going to be the first step to, if you have not had that estrangement yet, to try to prevent it. And then
Yes,
as you go along and they see that you're listening, they see that you hear them, you're going to have other conversations, but you're going to, before you can do any of that, Laine, the reality is this: most of us need to do some work on ourselves
yes.
because that does not come naturally, and we're usually not ready for those conversations. So we need to do some work on ourselves first and then have those conversations.
Well, and I think you touched on something perfectly in my experience when I
Uh
was
huh.
in seasons not close to some of my adult children.
Yeah.
When they remember, it seems maybe I'm wrong, but it's rarely that you're coming from the same perspective.
Oh, no.
They remember
Yes.
it in the same way. Is that true? And I think if we can talk about that just a little, it'll bring down the expectation of a mama listening to their child coming up with their perspective, and it's
Yes.
nothing what we thought,
No.
right?
Yeah, absolutely not. And not just in my own life have I experienced this, but I do a thing called a genogram with most of my clients. And we do go into family history, family of origin. And it's so interesting because there's these key moments that people tell me, this happened when I was 5, or I was
Yes,
7, or I was 10. And we talk about it, and they're usually this moment that I know, and they know too as an adult. The parent did not mean anything at that moment, but maybe there was a word said, or maybe there was a anger moment, was not the norm, but it had huge impact that kind of stuck. And that's what that child remembers. And the parent just went on and they don't even remember it being that big of a deal. And that is very, very normal and part of the process. So as parents, we need to almost get ourselves ready for these conversations and be willing to understand, just like us as we were children, there was big impactful moments that probably our parents didn't see the same way. That's what's happening with our adult children. But the difference is we live in a world that has to be navigated differently. And the reality is, our parents or the parents of the generations before me and you, and maybe even some a little bit of ours, they didn't have these tools. They had no idea to how to even navigate that. That is probably the one good thing that we have is we have a lot of tools that we can work through these things in a really great way if we choose to.
Yes. Well, is reconciliation always possible or desirable? I mean, how
Mm.
can both sides assess whether it's healthy to pursue?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. And I hate to even say it, but the reality is sometimes, and I say this so carefully, I don't think that's the norm. I think it's these rare cases, but there are situations on both sides where if that person refuses to change or they can't change, maybe because of some addiction issues or mental health issues, and it's just not safe emotionally, physically to be around that person. There are times that we just have to love from afar and we
Yes.
have to pray for them. So, yes, there are times that we need to keep that in place, that very hard boundary in place. But I want to also keep saying, I don't think that's the norm. That is rare cases, and we usually know when those are.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
that kind of leads me up to what are some of the common reasons? If you had
yeah.
to say, what are some of the common reasons that adult children abandon their parents?
Yeah, yeah. I can just tell you from some of the instances that I've heard, and there's a lot. I mean, that this is not a, the complete list because we could probably go on forever, but many, many times it is exactly what we've talked about. There's been some hurtful things in the past that were hurtful. Look, we're all learning as parents. We're usually very young when we're parenting, and maybe we lost our temper and we yelled, or maybe, we spanked too hard because back then we spanked. And some of those kind of things. And again, that's part of it. And sometimes maybe it's even more difficult things than that. That's a reason. I think another reason that often comes up is that they've tried to talk about something and they're not being heard and they finally just shut down. Sometimes it's parents, and this is just a reality parents need to be aware of, that adult children are growing up. They're trying to set boundaries, they're trying to establish their own family, and the parent is not respecting that. They continue to try to control, they continue to try to tell them what to do. And that's a legitimate reason to take a space. And another reason I hear often is the parent doesn't like the spouse or the person that their child has chosen to spend their life with. And that's not going to end well for you as a parent,
No.
So those are some reasons that I most often hear.
Well, I know, Kathy, you've got a wonderful program that you offer. Uh, and I think one of the greatest nuggets we can talk about is we need to be whole and healed
Yes.
to
Yeah.
receive some of the steps and processes that it takes to restore after estrangement and things like that. Touch on real quickly how people can find out more about your way to help us as moms and grandmoms or whatever to be, better, I guess, prepared to
Right.
heal for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I basically have just created something that I wish I had when I was in that place. I wish I had learned these things when I was in my 40s, probably earlier than that, but usually it's around your 40s, your kids are emerging into adulthood. And one of the things I completed myself that really helped me to navigate this and change everything was a course that I created, but it was pieces of this that I went through called Uncovered Grace. And you can access all these things on my Instagram account. It's at Kathy Cunningham 717. And so a link to that course is there. I also have a membership site called Grace Restored for Parents of Adults. And I have live teachings that we do on that, workshops that are pre recorded videos and PDFs. And then we have a community that we're just starting. This is very new. So it's all just up and running just in actually the last few days. So I'm excited right now. We're at 182 members. So we're going strong. And that would be a great thing because one thing I will say, Laine, that I want everyone to remember, yes, the most important thing is working on yourself. The second most important thing is having community, having people that have a like situation walking with you that can be encouraging, not causing you to feel worse about the situation, but giving you hope and encouragement.
So good, Kathy.
Mm.
Listen, estrangement is a wound that runs deep. But it's not the end of the story. Today, we've explored the reasons why many adult children feel the need to pull away and the emotional wreckage it can leave behind. Whether reconciliation is possible or not, healing begins with truth, grace, and support. If you're a parent aching with rejection, know this: your worth is not defined by your child's absence. God still sees you. You are not forgotten. You can grieve and grow. And in some cases, with prayer, time, and wise communication, bridges can be rebuilt. Hold on to hope, but also hold on to your peace. Even in the silence, God is working and you're not alone. Kathy, thank you again for going over this. We're so excited about the series with you. And listen, you do not want to miss the next few episodes of Warfare Parenting, faith-driven strategies for struggling parents of teens and adult children. See you next week. Thank you for joining us on Warfare Parenting. Remember, you can overcome even the most challenging parenting battles with faith and the right strategies. If this episode has touched your heart or provided valuable insights, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your support helps other struggling parents find the hope and guidance they need. Until next time, remain steadfast in faith and remember, together we never give up on our families. Visit my website too for my new book, Warfare Parenting, a daily battle plan to fight for your child. The first 10 days are free on my website and many other free resources. Go to LaineLawsonCraft.com.